Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Solo Spooky Story. My name's Rob, and today I'll be your host. For those of you that don't know, the Solo Spooky Stories are shorter episodes every other week, presented by myself, where I'll just talk about something that's pretty interesting. We'll have a listener submission, or, something that myself or Suze have found that we've decided will just be a short episode rather than a full one. And yeah, it's just something a bit different that people just seem to enjoy them. So we'll keep them going for as long as everyone wants them. But with that said, I hope you're all having a lovely day whenever it is that you're listening to this, and we'll just get into it. So today we are going to be talking about a pretty interesting UFO case, actually. It's probably one of the more known ones in, I suppose, UFO circles. When you go into places like Reddit and things like that, I think a lot of people talk about it like it's quite well known. You'll see it kind of referenced, kind of almost like nonchalantly, where people are like, oh, well, according to this incident, this is what we heard and this is what we saw. It's, I suppose, just one of those well-known ones that if you are at all interested in the UFO, I suppose, phenomena and things like that, you'd probably know more about this than I do. So, yeah, it's just an interesting case. And I suppose what makes this case today, the Lonnie Zamora incident, so fascinating is that we have actual physical evidence of something. And I suppose it kind of stands out a little bit more to other things as a result of this physical evidence. It's not really something that you usually get in UFO cases, or not as much anyway. So, it's just one of those intriguing ones that doesn't have a huge amount of details around it, but what it does have is fascinating. And yeah, it just leads to just I suppose, one of the more believable UFO cases out there as a result. I think because it's so concise in what it is. It doesn't really leave much open to interpretation one way or the other. But yeah, with that said, we'll get into it. So, as I said, we're talking about the Lonnie Zamora UFO incident. And this takes place on the 24th of April, 1964, in what seems to be a pretty quiet desert town of Socorro in New Mexico. And I just had a quick look at this area of New Mexico, and it does seem to be quite rural. There's not a huge amount, I suppose, geographically or population wise around it. It's a pretty small area, I think, especially in terms of America. This is a pretty quiet desert town, and I believe there's not a huge amount as a result around the larger area going on. So, not to insult anyone that might be from this area, but you know what I'm saying. It's a pretty quiet area. And the main person that's involved in all of this is a police officer named Lonnie Zamora. And he witnessed something to himself that was just so strange and so inexplicable that it remains one of the most credible UFO cases in history. And I don't think anyone would really disagree with that statement. Zamora himself actually said, I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't have seen it with my own eyes. He acknowledges that this is a pretty wild claim that he's talking about, and he's still pretty adamant that this happened. And I always find these cases really interesting where you have police officers talking about this, or like members of the military, or people, I suppose, who are a little bit more trained in things, or have more at stake to potentially lose. I'd imagine a police officer talking about the UFOs really kind of puts a bit of a target on their back as someone who might be passed over for promotions or things like that. We actually saw it in the Todmorden UFO case in the UK that I talked about before, where we directly saw that. We saw someone's career being affected as a result of them talking about their experiences. So it does happen. So I always just find it really interesting when police officers and such do come forward and talk about things that they saw, because it clearly made an impact enough on them that they want to talk about it. The other side of that coin is that they see an opportunity to make money and things like that, and people are going to believe police officers more than potentially a regular civilian. So who are we to know for sure? So as I said, some background here. Socorro in the 1960s was a pretty small desert town. It's surrounded by a vast desert, and its closest point to it is the White Sands missile range, actually. So White Sands at the time in the 60s, I believe, was one of the more active US military bases at the time. There's a lot going on in this time period. It's during the Cold War. There's a lot of missiles being tested. There's a lot of nuclear bombs being tested and ICBMs being developed and all that sort of stuff. The arms race is very much so happening at this point in time. So I'd imagine for the people of this town, strange lights in the sky were not at all unheard of. In fact, I'd say it's probably just become a daily way of life. You know, you're kind of just almost expecting to see weird shit in the sky that you don't understand what it is, and you're just putting it down to it's the military doing whatever it is that they're doing over there in White Sands and not really questioning it too much. I'd imagine as well they're probably seeing a lot of like planes and things like that in the sky, a lot of experimental aircraft. It's just kind of the way of life, I suppose, for a lot of these people who live in these towns. They come to expect it. It kind of becomes a way of life for them. It's just kind of normal. So all of this to say, as I said, is that someone like Zamora would be familiar with the unfamiliar. You know, he would be able to tell, I suppose, after a while, what is a US military craft or missile or something like that, and that he basically just can probably spot after a while what it is that they know and what it isn't that they don't know, if that makes sense. And yeah, so I think that's what makes this stand out more, is that Zamora himself talks about what happened as it was something that he'd never seen himself and that he'd never heard reported before. So I think when you're seeing these many things in the sky, if this is the thing that stands out to you, maybe it's time for us to sit up and listen to what they're saying. So Lonnie Zamora himself was a fairly respected police sergeant, and I've seen multiple accounts of him online, and everyone seems to talk about how he was known for his honesty, which is a rare thing, I suppose, in the States at the moment with all the things you hear about going on at the moment there. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, it seems to be that he seemed to be quite well known for his character, that he was an honest guy, and basically he wasn't a man that was prone to any sort of exaggeration. That's something that I've seen kind of consistently reported about him. And I've even seen some people go a bit further to say that he was actually even reluctant initially to even talk about what he saw. One investigator actually noted, I saw a quote online saying that Zamora was the most reluctant witness I ever interviewed. He wanted nothing more than to put the whole thing behind him. And I think that's another thing about these sort of cases, that when you have people who just want to get on with their lives, they're not looking to financially benefit from this sort of thing. I always kind of pay more attention to that than someone who immediately comes out with a book or, you know, starts charging for interviews and things like that. So let's get into the incident itself. So as I said, we're on the 24th of April 1964. At about 5:45 p.m, Zamora was chasing a speeding car, and I suppose this is maybe a regular thing for him. You know, he's out in his car, someone's speeding, he's chasing after them. Just standard police business, I'd assume. And while he was chasing the speeding car, he heard a roar come out of nowhere in the sky, and then he saw this bright flame emerge in the sky as well. So he, at this point, radioed in saying that he was actually going to check on this instead, and he thought that it was actually an explosion that had happened somewhere. It was that loud, like, and that kind of, I suppose, extreme. So he actually recalled after this saying that I heard a roar and saw a flame in the sky to the northwest, some distance away, maybe half a mile or a mile. So this is a pretty large explosion if he's seeing this half a mile or a mile away, that, you know, it's enough to make him basically abandon a car chase and instead turn towards this explosion. So as he drove towards the source of this explosion, he actually saw what he first thought was an overturned car. But as he got closer, he actually realized it was something else entirely. And a direct quote from him himself is, "It looked like an overturned white car, like aluminium. It was whitish against the mesa background, but not chrome. It was shaped like the letter O. I saw two people in white coveralls beside the object. It was normal in shape, but possibly they were small adults or large kids." He says at this point then it becomes clear to him that he's looking at some sort of craft, and that moments later the craft emitted this deafening roar and this blue-orange flame. And Zamora described it as the object rose straight up and took off very fast to the southwest. It disappeared in seconds. So this guy, he's in the middle of a police chase of a speeding car, sees this huge explosion off in the distance, drives up to it and sees these two beings dressed in what he said was white coveralls, that they were somewhat normal in shape, that they might have been small adults or large kids. So we're kind of getting an idea of their height there, maybe around 5 foot or something like that. And yeah, he basically just can't really explain that. And as he approaches the craft, it just fucking shoots out of the sky. It's just gone in seconds. So for something to disappear that fast as well, it must be moving at a staggering speed to be able to just kind of effectively disappear in a matter of seconds. So yeah, like it seems to be a case of within minutes, other officers arrived and they immediately started asking Zamora about this. So he claimed that the object, with a bit more prompting, that the object was egg-shaped or metallic and that it was resting on legs. He said that it might have been around the size of a small car, but it was difficult to say exactly, and that it was white against the desert backdrop. And then obviously talked about this blue-orange flame that shot out from beneath it. He did also acknowledge that the craft lifted off the ground and then just shot away at this incredible speed. And something that he noticed was that it actually left behind scorched brush and 4 distinct landing impressions in the soil. So as these other officers arrived, as I said, and they prompted him and talked to him about this, they investigated what he had claimed, and they did actually find burned brush and smouldering grass. They also found these shallow landing marks in the ground, and I think what kind of threw them more was that Zamora there himself was quite shaken by this, and he was insistent that this is what happened, and he allegedly repeated the same story without any sort of embellishment, any sort of, you know, changing the story in any way. Like, he was adamant that this is what happened, which again, I think if you know this guy for being one specific way, to see him so shaken by this must be quite a strange experience. And a state police sergeant actually talked about this afterwards, and he's directly quoted as saying, "I've known Lonnie for years. He was white as a sheet, visibly shaken. He wasn't making this up." So naturally, with all of this happening and with the report of it coming out and Zamora himself making a report on it, the case quickly drew attention. And this attention came in the form of the FBI, the Air Force, and Project Blue Book. So Project Blue Book, for anyone that isn't aware, was effectively the government body that was responsible for investigating UFOs and the unknown, effectively. They're kind of almost like the Mulder and Scully of the real world. These people are here to investigate UFOs effectively, and to either discredit or disprove, or in certain cases say that they weren't sure. And I am planning a much larger episode around Project Blue Book that we will absolutely get into. But the main thing to know about them is that they were effectively the authority on UFOs in the States at this time. And they were joined by their head scientific consultant, J. Allen Hynek, who I believe we may have talked about before. He's almost kind of like, if we're sticking with the X-Files, he's almost kind of like the cigarette smoking man from the X-Files. This dude is kind of everywhere when it comes to UFOs in American history, and kind of a bit more of the paranormal as well, but like, he is everywhere when it comes to UFOs. Like, this guy, like, he's fucking everywhere. He was even, I think, made a cameo appearance in the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Like, this guy is well known in UFO circles, and he was actually employed by the government to investigate these sightings. As I said, he was their scientific consultant. He was known as being very, very skeptical about things, and I suppose that is his job. You know, he should be approaching these from a skeptical point of view. And he himself, later on in life, did confirm that he thought that this was probably one of the most compelling UFO cases ever recorded. Just to acknowledge that. So yeah, so as I said, the investigations started. The Hynek actually, a direct quote from him was that he actually wrote down in one of his reports, "This is one of the most puzzling cases I've ever dealt with." And years later, he actually allegedly told a conference held in the CIA's building in Langley. So I don't know how true this is, but I've seen it reported in a few different places. He said that this is the best documented close encounter we have, which is pretty strong words coming from this guy. You know, presumably this guy has seen a lot. So for him to be like, no, this is 100% the one, this is the smoking gun, kind of says a lot, I think, about this. But yeah, so after the investigations, after everything happened, the physical evidence was reviewed, a number of photographs were taken of it, and basically a proper investigation of the site did take place. Project Blue Book, they actually while they were quite well known for often dismissing sightings as misidentifications, they actually classified this case as unknown. And that designation alone actually makes it quite significant, because for them to say unknown about this, the more you look into it, it kind of leads to them basically admitting that they actually don't know what this was. Through all of their investigations, through with the FBI, the Air Force, presumably talking with other three-letter agencies, the fact that no one was able to come out and give them a definitive explanation for this, I think it actually says a lot for this case. You know, the fact that they themselves have said this is unknown, I think that has a lot of weight behind it. And that kind of concludes the story. As I said at the start, like, it's actually quite a concise story. Like, there's not a huge amount content-wise, I suppose, happening with this. Like, it's a very short period of time. There's only one sighting, and then that's it. All that we have left is this physical evidence, and that's kind of all that we have with it. So, like, naturally there's been a lot of like theories and explanations that have come out about it since that I'll touch on before we conclude today, but I suppose the main theory that's come out from people is that this was some sort of experimental craft from White Sands, and that Zamora just must have stumbled upon a secret military test vehicle, and that the proximity to White Sands does lend credibility to this, but no records of any such craft have ever surfaced. People have also pointed to the fact that Project Blue Book, a government entity like investigating potential government aircraft, are best placed to put something down as unknown because it draws attention away from what could potentially be some sort of experimental aircraft or something like that. Another theory that I've seen, which is probably quite implausible, was that the New Mexico Tech University, or whatever you want to call it, had a bunch of students there who were apparently rumored to stage elaborate pranks. Some people have talked about that they somehow managed to create the image of some sort of hovering, flame-spewing craft, and that they managed to just trick this one police officer with this like giant fireball and explosions and all that sort of stuff. I don't really lend any credence to this, but it's weirdly talked about quite a bit online, so I did have to include it. Another theory is that this was some sort of astronomical or atmospheric misinterpretation, and some skeptics have actually argued that Zamora just must have misidentified a natural phenomenon. They said that it must have been either maybe the sighting of a star that, you know, depending on the time of day and things like that, it is in the evening time, so it could have been something like Venus that was visible on the horizon. They've talked about it could have been maybe a comet or something like that, you know, there's multiple different theories about this, that it must have been something astronomical rather than extraterrestrial. But people do point to the physical landing traces and I suppose the corroborating details from people who saw Zamora at the time and saw the evidence themselves that this is quite unlikely as well. So that just kind of, I suppose, leaves us with the final theory, which is the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And for a lot of people, this is almost the simplest explanation, in that Zamora witnessed a genuine UFO, either of human or non-human origin, and that basically the presence of these humanoid figures and the craft's design and its sudden acceleration all point to something beyond our known technology of the time, or something that's so ultra secret that even today it still hasn't actually come out as to what it actually was. And I suppose to lend some credence to this, an FBI memo that has been since declassified actually said, quote, "There's little doubt that Officer Zamora encountered something unknown." So, you know, I think that kind of, it says a lot, really. I don't think you really need to say more about it than that. So, yeah, so this case, as I said, it's pretty important because you've got quite a credible witness. There was actual physical evidence, and the US Air Force and their investigative body, Project Blue Book, they couldn't explain it themselves. And J. Allen Hynek concluded at a different point in time that there's no question in my mind that Lonnie Zamora saw something that cannot be explained in conventional terms. Who better to conclude this than the man himself who's responsible for investigating these things? So we may never actually know what Zamora saw that night, but I think Zamora actually summed it up best himself. He said that all I can say is what I saw. It was real. And, you know, I think that's it's a pretty good way to conclude it. You know, he knows what he saw and he's adamant that it was real. And as far as he's concerned, that's all he needed to know. But yeah, that concludes it for today. You know, I hope you found this pretty interesting. And if you've not heard about this case, I'd encourage you to get in touch with us and let us know what you think about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on if you think that this was actually a genuine UFO case, either human or non-human, or if potentially it was some sort of elaborate hoax or a prank or something else. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting one. So you can get us on social media at Threads and Instagram at the Spooky AF Pod. You can get us on YouTube in the comments of this episode, or you can email us at the spookyafpodcast@gmail.com. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this one, because as I said, it's a super interesting case in how little there is to it. And I think that almost makes it more compelling than other ones that we've heard. But yeah, with that said, I hope you're having a lovely day whenever it is you're listening to this, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy, guys.